debt ceiling. The US has until June 1st to negotiate, which is just over a week for the politicians in DC to negotiate on raising the debt ceiling. Otherwise, the US will probably default on its debt, at least some debt it will default on. It will not pay its debt. Now, that's obviously huge because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. That would probably be a bit of a problem, wouldn't it, right?
Yeah, it would be a huge problem. But more importantly, is uh, really are we going to default? Likely not likely. They could put a band-aid on it and say, here's enough money to run for the next 2 months instead of discussing a real budget. So,
They call that a continuing resolution. And I mean, yeah, the US, to put it in context, the US has never really broadly defaulted on its debt. I mean, they say they have actually defaulted on some very specific types of bonds in the past, but there's never been like a massive broad default on all of the, treasuries, 6-month treasuries, 2-year, et cetera. 2-year notes or whatever. But yeah, that in theory, it would start to not pay its debts by June 1st. The government would start to run out of money. And obviously, as the world's reserve currency, that would kill confidence in the US dollar and could even start the process of other currencies replacing the US dollar, maybe a basket of currencies replacing the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Now, Biden, he's currently in Japan. He's cutting it short to come back to negotiate. But the Republicans, they've been negotiating, and today they actually walked out of the negotiations.
well, they said they were talking to themselves. The real question is like, who's negotiating the debt ceiling? But not only with the debt ceiling, there's the principles of like, this is just the overall budget for the United States that gets tied into the debt ceiling. So there's so much more involved than just paying off our bonds or paying off the interest that we owe on lended money and things like that. It's a lot of different things. And right now the negotiation is between like 5 people. How are these people qualified to negotiate the largest budget on the planet, annual budget on the planet?
Well,
Like,
you looked into this, right? You looked into the people doing it.
yeah, it's crazy because these guys, like, there's Shalonda Young, Steve Ricchetti, Louisa Terrell, Garrett Graves, and Kevin McCarthy, who has a staff, right? None of them have a degree in finance. None of them have a degree that would lead them towards understanding how accounting works for a business or budgeting for any type of strategy or anything. So it's kind of crazy. And the only person I saw out of the 5 of them that had any type of sensibility is Shalonda Young, right? So at least she's been on the House Oversight Committee for the last 17 years. So she understands the typical, committee of appropriations is what it is. And she's understands how to appropriate things on a committee level. So she has some insight for at least 17 years of doing it.
Although her
So,
degree is in psychology, not finance.
yeah, exactly. And then, you have, but she seems to be the most qualified out of everybody. But again, she's a lifelong politician,
Yeah.
right? So how much understanding does she see budgets, spending? I think these guys think in terms of billions, and a real business thinks of dollars, right?
Here's our
So
second guy, who is Steve Ricchetti. Who's this guy?
this guy's a disaster. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you. The guy ran a lobbying firm from 2001 to 2012. That was his main business that he's had. He was part of the Clinton administration from 96 to 98. And then he came over and started to work for Biden as vice president. When he was VP under Obama, he came part of Biden's administrative group. And he's really done nothing besides lobby for special interest in Washington. That's really all he's done. He has a law degree, right? So he has a degree in law, so he knows where he should step when he's lobbying and where not to step while he's lobbying. You spend 10 years making millions of dollars lobbying in Washington, and then you sit on the cabinets of Bill Clinton and you sit on the cabinet of Joe Biden under Obama, and now you're under Joe Biden directly. Like, why? They lobbyists should not be allowed to be part of the cabinet. They're trying to make money and bring policy four companies. And it goes back to the corporatocracy, is that we don't really have a democracy. We don't really have a republic. We have corporations that pay for lobbyists to create laws that benefit them. Garrett Graves doesn't even have a degree. Another lifelong politician from Louisiana. Interesting, Shalonda and Garrett both come from similar places in Louisiana.
Now, this guy, is he on the Republican side?
He's on the Republican side,
Okay.
but all he's done his whole professional career is be part of the GOP as an aide to former congressman, and then became a congressman. So what does he have authority to actually negotiate the debt ceiling or our budget for the United States? Like, how does that make any sense at all? None of those people should be there except for Shalonda. And there's another woman named Louisa Terrell. Louisa Terrell is an interesting person. She actually was the executive director of the Biden Foundation up until 2019. Can't really find much about her net worth or anything like that, but she is part of the Biden Foundation prior to Biden being put into office. Pretty interesting to me, considering the allegations that are going against Joe Biden and his family from the House of Representatives with the $10 million money payoff from China, Ukraine, and other areas. So it's interesting to see like how much of that money went through the Biden Foundation, I wonder. Maybe none of it, maybe all of it.
Let's talk about what the sticking points in the argument actually are as well, because, the Republicans, they want to do some things, bringing down spending, etc. This is what they want, although I think a lot of the things that Republicans are doing is kind of too little too late, because really it's like when you get into debt on a credit card, and there comes a point where it just sort of snowballs and it's out of control, which is basically where we are, I think, as a country, especially with the rising interest rates. We'll talk about that in just a moment, how much the interest is going to rise. A lot of bonds are coming due in the next few years, and the average rate right now is something like 1.8%. And as they refinance those bonds, they're going to be kicking in on the new rate. And so you're going, 6-month treasury is now like 5%. The 10-year is like, 2 or 3%. I don't know. But, the new rates are going to be kicking in anyway. So we're going to, instead of being at an average rate of like 1.8%, we're going to be at an average rate of something like 3% or more on US government debt. So interest is going to absolutely shoot through the roof. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first of all, we just go through what the Republicans are trying to do. So that the Democrats basically, and Joe Biden, they want to raise the debt ceiling without any conditions. They just want to raise it, have a simple bill and raise it. The Republicans want to tie it to decreased spending so that, in theory, you can get the spending under control. They want work requirements for certain government programs. For example, they want able-bodied people to have to work 20 hours a week if they're going to be eligible for food stamps and Medicaid. They want to reform permitting for oil and gas, and they want to rescind unspent COVID funds. So there's a lot of COVID money still out there that hasn't been spent that we could actually take back and perhaps use to pay off some of the debt. What do you think about those, Mike?
I mean, who determines who's able-bodied and who's not? That's my first question. There's people with psychological problems. There's all kinds of different things. So like, I would say that whole system needs a reforming before you want to put it into a bill. That just seems like a token to try to stop the problem. Like,
it's not really tackling the root of the problem, is it?
Oh, we're going to throw this in there. This is just going to create more problems. Yeah.
Right.
It's really a waste of time almost. So like, why did you even put that in there? It doesn't make any sense. And then rescinding the COVID funds. Yeah. Should have did that when they started giving away COVID funds.
Yeah.
Was.
I think that, with the COVID bills, the first bill was the unanimous, pretty bipartisan bill. But the ones after that were not. So I think a lot of the Republicans feel probably that the later COVID bills were not necessary. They should be rescinded. Talking about how much the interest will increase, I want to read you guys this. In February, the Congressional Budget Office projected that the annual net interest costs would total $640 billion in 2023. So that's doubling. And then it would soar to $739 billion in 2024. And then up to $1.4 trillion in 2033. That's a huge amount. The US would basically be paying $1.4 trillion out of its, budget just on interest payments. That's basically burning money. Money's not even going to, it's just going to the pockets of people who own the debt. I mean, to some degree, that would be paying people, US citizens who own the debt, which would be nice, but it's not doing anything useful like buying planes for the military or addressing education or the fentanyl crisis or whatever that's going to be helpful to the country. This is the interest payments as the net of government revenue. So all of the money that the government brings in taxes, this is how much we're going to be paying in interest versus the revenue. So it's about 40%. So of all the revenue that government brings in taxes, the US would be paying out 40% of it as interest. That's pretty ridiculous. That's like you get your monthly paycheck of $5,000 and you immediately have to pay $2,000 just to give it away, right? Pay your loan sharks or whatever. That's the equivalent.
Maybe they should ask for debt forgiveness.
They should. They need a balance transfer credit card or something, 0% APR for like 2 decades.
More like 100 years at this point.
100 years. Yeah, 100 years.
A hundred-year lease like Hong Kong, right? Let's see if we
Right.
can get away with it somehow. No, I mean, I don't see an end to this problem anytime soon. The money is just being, burned at an astronomical rate. They talk about making $1 trillion coin or $30 trillion bill or something ridiculous. Like that'll just burn more money in the long run. Inflation's going to be worse and worse and worse. Go buy gold and silver because eventually you go to the grocery store with a gram of silver and buy a bunch of apples. If they don't find a way to start whittling away this crazy debt, it's your children and their children that are going to suffer for it.
That's right. I mean, I think their current plan has been to inflate out of it. That's why we've had this inflation, which obviously does sort of decrease the debt in real terms. The Fed's trying to get inflation back down to 2%, and interest rates look like they're going to stay elevated for quite a while. I mean, what we're at right now, like 5% on the 6-month treasury, that's more like a normal interest rate that you would have had throughout, the later decades of the 20th century. It's only really since 2008, since the financial crisis, that we've had interest rates close to zero. So it's not really a normal situation we've been in. Government's been getting free money for like 15 years, and now
Yeah.
situation is changing.
If Jamie Dimon can figure out the problems with all the banks that failed around him, along with Credit Suisse and UBS figuring out their problems, someone's going to figure it out. Or, we'll have to switch our currency away from the reserve. 40% of our annual revenue is just
Crazy.
it's absolutely crazy.